My name's George Eliot.
My name is George Eliot.
Hello, I'm George Eliot.
My name is George Eliot.
My name is George Eliot, spelt E-L-L-I-O-T-T. This is also George Eliot. Now, she was born on the 22nd of November 1890, and I was born on the 20th of November 1963. So there is a 131-year difference between the two.
You can never imagine what it is to have a man's force of
genius in you, and yet to suffer the slavery of being a girl. The only thing I should care much to dwell on would be the absolute despair I suffered from of ever being able to achieve anything.
Mary Ann Evans was born at Arbury Farm at 5 o'clock this morning. My father did not raise himself from being an artisan to be a farmer. He raised himself from being an artisan to be a man whose extensive knowledge in very varied practical departments made his services valued through several counties. George Eliot was born in this very room when her father, Robert Evans, was the land agent at Arbury. And I'm the current holder of that job as the estate manager here. Many of the things that Robert Evans would have seen are very similar today. The job hasn't fundamentally changed, but the way we do it has. George Eliot was here for the first part of her life, but as a very young child, she moved to Griff House Farm. Her father was offered that as part of the deal of his job. It gave him a small farm and an additional income in addition to his salary as the agent.
Our national life is like that scenery which I early learned to love. Our Midland plains have never lost their familiar expression and conservative spirit for me. Yet, at every other mile, since I first looked on them, some sign of worldwide change, some new direction of human labour has wrought itself into what one may call the speech of the landscape. In contrast with those grander and vaster regions
of the earth, which keep an indifferent aspect in the presence of men's toil and devices.
This is the most important building in George Eliot's life. It inspired the home of Maggie Tulliver in Eliot's semi-autobiographical work, The Mill on the Floss.
Well, the history of this part of the building is that on the left you can see the old building and the attic that features in the Mill on the Floss, and then to the right is the much more recent extension when a hotel and restaurant was added in the early 1980s.
Hi, my name's Jackie Dreer and I work here at the Premier Inn Nuneaton. It's also the childhood home of George Eliot. Would you like me to show you to some rooms? She used to sit up here writing poems and little stories, looking out the window to a vastly different landscape than there is now, but I like it. It's cosy. This place is definitely haunted. You feel things, you feel chills, and you hear noises and the creaks, doors slamming and voices and murmurings. There's definitely some sort of haunting.
George Eliot remembered this attic when she created her spirited heroine, Maggie Tulliver. who retreated under the eaves and violently beat her doll in frustration at her family.
I know she escaped through literature. She went to another place, which I can imagine having this view, and if it was just fields, I'd probably lose myself as well.
Like Maggie Tulliver, who constantly seeks and is often denied the approval of her older brother Tom, Eliot adored her older brother Isaac, and they would play together around these country fields.
I cannot choose but think upon the time when our two lives grew like two buds that kiss. His sorrow was my sorrow, and his joy sent little leaps and laughs through all my frame. My doll seemed lifeless, and no girlish toy had any reason when my brother came.
I fancy my father thought me an odd child. I held him in great awe and appeared more timid and sensitive in his presence than at other times, a circumstance which, perhaps, helped to confirm him in the intention to educate me on a different plan from the prescriptive one with which he had complied in the case of my elder brother.
Hello, my name's Philippa and I work at Lovett's Estate Agents. This building used to house the school which George Eliot attended as a teenager.
During this period, she became fervently evangelical, gave up all music other than religious hymns, and condemned the reading of novels as frivolous. She did, however, permit herself the writing of religious verse.
A saint. Oh, would that I could claim the privileged, the honoured name, and confidently take my stand, though lowest in the saintly band.
George Eliot's father was the land agent for the Newdigards at the great house near Griff, Arbury Hall. Her literary ambitions would begin in this very library.
I've engaged, if possible, to complete the chart of ecclesiastical history, the plan of which I sketched out last year. The profits arising from its sale, if any, will go to the Attleborough Church. Mrs. Newdigard is very anxious that I should do thus, and she permits me to visit her library when I please, in search of any books that may assist me.
Encouraged by her father, it was here she embarked on a habit of private reading, which was to form the foundation for one of the greatest self-educations of the century.
My mind presents just such an assemblage of disjointed specimens, of history, ancient and modern.
Scraps of poetry picked up from Shakespeare, Cooper, Wordsworth and Milton.
Newspaper topics, Latin verbs, geometry, entomology, metaphysics.
Exaltation is a dream before achievement and rarely comes after. What comes after is rather the sense that the work has been produced within one, like offspring, developing and growing by some force of which one's life has served as a vehicle, and that what is left of oneself is only a poor husk. It's quite a profound explanation of the creative process and how difficult it could be, that one gets so involved in it emotionally, and one suffers tremendous pain and even illness before, as she said, the work is wrought out of her as a complete organism. It was very much like giving birth, and it almost being a death experience as you give life to the work that you're producing.
I came from Syria 2000 here as a refugee. I fled from Syria 1982 after my city being destroyed from Al-Assad regime. And I teach here Arabic studies, Islamic studies. She believes the world should get all the people at least minimum type of education. So we try to carry on, fulfill her dream by deliver the education and knowledge to everyone who needs it in this country, yes.
Elliot hated being nudged out of her childhood home. And she resented her family's expectation that in Coventry society, she would be found a husband.
I will try and be as useful to you as if I had been a boy. And then perhaps some great scholar will want to marry me and will not mind about a dowry. And he would like to come and live with you, and he will be to you in place of my brother. And you will not be sorry that I was a daughter.
She and her father set up house in Bird Grove, and she longed for a social group that she could relate with. Charles Bray was the proprietor of a newspaper, the Coventry Herald and Observer.
We are Charles and Cara Bray.
We're really close friends with George Eliot.
I own the local newspaper and the ribbon factory.
We're writers, publishers, and radicals.
She was sometimes an anonymous writer and sometimes a reviewer with her initials attached to what she did, so we know that, for example, she wrote a piece on vice and sausages, which was about the chief constable who was connected with some butchery scandal. She was going to chemistry lectures, she was having tuition in Greek, and she was exploring as much as she could intellectually. And in this, the Brays, their whole household, really encouraged her.
I consider her the most delightful companion I have ever known. But there were two sides. Hers was the temperament of genius, which has always its sunny and shady sides. She was frequently very depressed and often very provoking. And we had violent quarrels, but the next day, whenever we met, they were quite forgotten.
I feel a sort of madness growing upon me, just the opposite of the delirium which makes people fancy that their bodies are filling the room. It seems to me
as if I were shrinking into that mathematical abstraction, a point. So entirely am I destitute of contact that I am unconscious of length or breadth. And by the time you see me again, I shall have lost all possibility of giving you any demonstration of a spiritual existence.
Part of what was troubling Eliot was the exposure to radical ideas that would lead her to reject some of her most deeply held religious beliefs.
My whole soul has been engrossed in the most interesting of all inquiries for the last few days, and to what result my thoughts may lead I know not, possibly to one that will startle you, but my only desire is to know the truth, my only fear to cling to error.
Elliot became an ardently committed unbeliever, just as she had once been evangelical. One of her greatest acts of defiance occurred when she refused to go to church with her father.
Went to Trinity Church in the forenoon. Miss Lewis went with me. Marianne did not go.
I could not, without vile hypocrisy, profess to join in worship which I wholly disapprove. This, and this alone, I will not do even for your sake. Anything else, however painful, I would cheerfully brave to give you a moment's joy. Her losing her faith is something I can relate to, in that when I had a top knot and then I cut my hair and drifted away from my Sikh faith in my teenage years. And it's not only painful for your parents, it's painful for you because you're losing all your touchstones and all your stability in your life, and you can really sense the agony that she's going through herself in that quote. I'm lucky in that my writing reconnected me with my family, in that I ended up writing about them and they ended up, approving of what I wrote about. But George Eliot never had that satisfaction. I can't imagine the depression and the pain that must have caused her. But I do sense that in everything she does, she's trying to explain herself to her family.
The results of nonconformity in a family are just an epitome of what happens on a larger scale in the world.
I hated living under the shadow of my father's strictness. This you must be, that you must not be, pressed on me like a frame that got tighter and tighter as I grew. I wanted to live a large life, with freedom to do what everyone else did, and be carried along in a great current, not obliged to care.
My life is a perpetual nightmare, always haunted by something to be done which I have never had the time, or rather the energy, to do. Dear father is very uneasy and his moans distract me.
I sat by him with my hand in his till 4 o'clock, and he then became quieter and has had some comfortable sleep. He's obviously weaker this morning and has been for the last 2 or 3 days. What shall I be without my father? It will seem as if a part of my moral nature were gone. My father, since he's gone, and looking back, I'm thinking the effect, even as it's 20 years since he's gone, but I still, the impact of what your parents teach you and what is expected of you and what is ingrained in you. I was born and brought up in Folesville, so knew about Georgia Eliot and some of the similarities, like after her mother passed away and she was 16. My mum died when I was 16. I'm thinking of the responsibility I felt towards my father at that time, had to look after him, and you try and sort of do the best. And the era that, like George Eliot was, and her personal life is quite similar to the Asian community and the way we've been brought up. The expectations, without, it's not somebody saying, and it is part of your moral nature, of what your parents have ingrained in you or the way you are. I had a younger brother, and it made me think of that because she had a brother with her. So those sort of things, it sort of made me think about, which I hadn't, you know, but you do without thinking.
Family likeness has often a deep sadness in it. Nature, that great tragic dramatist, knits us together by bone and muscle and divides us by the subtler web of our brains, blends yearning and repulsion, and ties us by our heartstrings to the beings that jar us at every movement. We hear a voice with the very cadence of our own, uttering the thoughts we despise. We see eyes, so like our mothers, averted from us in cold alienation, and the father puts us to shame by his daily errors.
Returning from her travels, she found her siblings were so busy with their own lives, they had no time for her.
Oh, the dismal weather and the dismal country and the dismal people. I am determined to sell everything I possess and be a stranger and a foreigner on the earth forevermore.
Her great exile was about to begin.
My system responds
sensitively to the London
weather signs, political,
social, literary. I belong to the nation of London.
I can see her now, with her hair over her shoulders, the easy chair half sideways to the fire, her feet over the arms, and a proof in her hands, in that dark room at the back of number 142. It was so unusual to be a female editor that she wasn't even allowed to be described as the editor. The editor of the Westminster Review was in name John Chapman, although George Eliot was de facto the editor of the magazine and in fact told him, hands off.
Chapman is a very charming man, a very nice man, a very well-meaning man, but a little bit of a rotter when it comes to women. Not only does he have a wife who's 10 years older than him, he's also having an affair with his children's governess. And now it seems he would quite like to add George Eliot to his sort of rotation of women. And George Eliot, who at this point becomes slightly attracted to Chapman as well, slightly susceptible to his slightly blustery charm. And there is evidence, in fact, on a couple of occasions they did sleep together. But I mean, as you can imagine, 3 women under the same house, all romantically involved with one man, it becomes so intolerable. George Eliot has to move out because the tensions become just too much for everybody.
Eliot continued to edit and write for the Westminster Review. She became resigned to the fact that she seemed unlikely to marry.
Every day's experience seems to deepen the voice of foreboding that has long been telling me The bliss of reciprocated affection is not allotted to you under any form. A consciousness of possessing the fervent love of a human being would soon become your heaven. Therefore, it would be your curse.
It must be a terrible sorrow to be young and unattractive, to look into the mirror and see a sallow, unhealthy face with a yellowish skin, straight nose, and mouse-colored hair. To begin with, she is magnificently ugly, deliciously hideous. She has a low forehead, a dull grey eye, a vast pendulous nose. She seemed to me so old, ugly, a heavy head which seemed to large in proportion, the mouth with huge, protruding, English teeth. I had not yet managed to recover from my confusion when George Eliot came up to me and began to speak in her soft, beautifully velvety voice. The first sound of this voice suddenly reconciled me to reality and returned me to my George Eliot, the one who lived in my imagination. Never in my life had I heard a softer, more insinuating, more enchanting voice.
He was a lively, lean, agile man. One of that type whose age is very difficult to determine. We're old-looking at 20 and young-looking at 50. There was little of that notorious English staidness and reticence in this lively person, who it seemed couldn't sit still for a moment, whose eyes were dancing, hands fluttering.
Mr. Lewis especially is kind and attentive and has quite won my regard after having had a good deal of my vituperation. Like a few other people in the world, he is much better than he seems. George Eliot had begun her relationship with George Henry Lewis thinking that she didn't like him very much, but gradually he won her regard, as she says there, and she is trying to persuade her friend, as she did with all her other friends, that Lewis was really a rather nice man, and she hoped that her friends would like him. He was said to be the ugliest man in London, and maybe it was rather nice for her to find somebody who himself was no great beauty, so that the two of them were well matched. She would have been my step-great-great-grandmother had she been able to marry Lewis. They would love to have been married, but he wasn't able to divorce his wife Agnes because he had recognised her children by his friend Thornton Hunt as his own. However, right from the beginning of her relationship with Lewis, once they had gone off together, she called herself Mrs. Lewis.
Their relationship scandalized even their most liberal-minded friends.
I have counted the cost of the step that I have taken, and am prepared to bear, without irritation or bitterness, renunciation by all my friends. I am not mistaken in the person to whom I have attached myself. He is worthy of the sacrifice I have incurred, and my only anxiety is that he should be rightly judged. My relationship was a bit more unusual, I suppose, because I'm with somebody who's 26 years older than me, and that's quite a big age gap. And I know that family and friends at the beginning were quite cautious about that, more out of concern for me, maybe thinking I'm with a much older person and maybe he wants me to be a carer, or, you know, there was a lot of caution and people sort of feeling not very comfortable about it at all until they'd met him and we'd become more established and they understood that, you know, the relationship was about the feelings we had for each other and not about anything else. I think, you know, she says that she was sure about the person she wanted to be with, and I was as well.
It's not true that love makes all things easy. It just makes us choose what is difficult.
I'm going to tell you some very unexpected news. I am sure you retain enough sisterly affection for me to be glad that I should have a kind husband to love me and take care of me. He is older than I am, not at all full of wealth or beauty, but very full indeed of literature and physiology and the kindest heart, of which, of course, I think all the better because it is devoted to me. I have had an interview with your brother in consequence of your letter to him announcing your marriage. He is so much hurt at your not having previously made some communication to him as to your intention and prospects that he cannot make up his mind to write, feeling that he could not do so in a brotherly spirit. Permit me to ask when and where you were married. Our marriage is not a legal one, though it is regarded by us both as a sacred bond. He is at present unable to contract a legal marriage because he is not legally divorced.
I loathe your character and your conduct. I have had a harder life than you have had, but I have found my comfort in doing my duty. If you are in want, I will provide for you. But you shall not come under my roof. It is enough that I have to bear the thought of your disgrace. The sight of you is hateful to me.
It may be desirable to mention to you that I am not dependent on anyone. The larger part of my income for several years having been derived from my own constant labour as a writer. You will perceive, therefore, that in my conduct towards my own family, I have not been guided by any motives of self-interest. But you have always enjoyed punishing me. You have always been hard and cruel to me, even when I was a little girl, and always loved you better than anyone else in the world. You have no pity. You have no sense of your own imperfection and your own sins.
Well, if your feelings are so much better than mine, let me see you show them in some other way than by conduct that is likely to disgrace us all. I have a different way of showing my affection.
Because you are a man, Tom, and have power, and can do something in the world.
Then if you can do nothing, submit to those that can.
I will not submit it from you.
You can never imagine what it is to have a man's force of genius in you, and yet to suffer the slavery of being a girl.
Having mannequins to tell us stories, it affects people in different ways. Some people enjoy seeing figures dressed and then can get a feeling for how those people might have looked at the time of their lives. Other people are terrified by it and they come across it and it looks unearthly.
She did the hard work, she wrote the books, and I'm not sure sometimes if you put a lot of men in despair with a woman, whether it takes away her power, if you like. There were plenty of women who she was in correspondence with who were incredibly significant to her, and they're not here. They're not pictured and they're not really discussed. So, and I think there's been some significant biographical work done as well since this display was done, and we'd want to bear some of that in mind. I suppose Luz has to be here because it's her love for him and her choice to live an unusual lifestyle with him that very much shaped the way she had to conduct her everyday life. So he's always going to be part of that story.
There is a power in the direct glance of a sincere and loving human soul, which will do more to dissipate prejudice and kindle charity than the most elaborate arguments.
I am anxious to begin my fiction writing.
The great thing for George Eliot was that she was able to use those 37 years of her life, which had seemed to her before humiliating failure. She was able to use those years to become a novelist that somehow redeemed the past and what she'd been. That she wasn't just passively having lived it, but actively recreating it.
The only effect I ardently long to produce by my writing is that those who read them should be better able to imagine and to feel the pains and joys of those who differ from themselves in everything but the broad fact of being struggling, erring creatures.
Eliot's novels were radical because of their compassionate depiction of everyday lives, leading readers to empathise with the characters rather than judge them.
An impetuous desire shook Janet through all her members. It seemed to master her with the inevitable force of strong fumes that flood our senses before we are aware. Her hand was on the decanter. Pale and excited, she was lifting it out of its niche, when, with a start and a shudder, she dashed it to the ground, and the room was filled with the odour of the spirit. She's overcome with this desire for alcohol. And the way that Eliot writes it, I just think is perfect. That's sort of what would happen in that scenario. And it's one of those examples of Eliot being able to write really well about such strong and passionate feelings. And for me, having felt those types of emotions, being able to read something like that and think, wow, yes, other people do feel this way. Other people have felt this way for a great many years before I was on the planet. That, you know, it's a comfort, but also it gives me a way to explore those feelings safely.
Once Mary Ann Evans started to write fiction, she adopted a male pseudonym, George Eliot. She believed that the work of a male writer would be taken more seriously. A pseudonym would also conceal her own controversial life.
There was clearly no suspicion that I was a woman. They were sure that I was a clergyman,
a Cambridge man. I was the father of a family. They were sure that I was a man who had seen a great deal of society. That was George Eliot talking about keeping her pseudonym quite private. I was Adam Chase for a time, and the reason that came about was I wanted to write thrillers with quite blokey themes, to put it one way. And my agent actually decided that it would be a good idea if we use this Adam Chase pseudonym, because it was assumed that as a female I couldn't write these sort of action-adventure style novels. So George Eliot changed her name because she was writing in an era when female writers tended to write romance, and she had much bigger themes in mind, and also because she had a fairly scandalous private life, so she was distancing herself from that as well. Whatever may be the success of my stories, I shall be resolute in preserving my incognito, having observed that a nom de plume secures all the advantage without the disagreeables of reputation.
When someone tried to take credit for her work, Eliot was forced to reveal her true identity. She never announced her pen name, though. As a fiction writer, she was always George Eliot, a novelist known above all for her humane wisdom.
I have come to the conclusion that human nature is lovable.
With the publication of Adam Bede onwards, she became celebrated. She was also hugely successful financially.
Writing is part of my religion. At the same time, I believe almost all the best books in the world have been written with the hope of getting money for them. She did embrace the fruits of her success. In 1863, she and Lewis bought a beautiful house in Regent's Park, which they furnished to an incredibly high standard. Around that time, she started spending lots of money on clothes and carriages. But at the same time, she always had this kind of thriftiness that she'd been brought up with. And I think that gives a tremendous urgency to questions of money in her work. Very often in the novels, she presents very complex ethical and moral choices within the framework of motivation and choice relating to a specific financial question.
I don't want the world to give me anything for my books, except money enough to save me from the temptation to write only for money.
In 1870, Eliot began to write her masterpiece, Middlemarch, regarded by many as the greatest novel in the English language. Set in a provincial town in the 1830s, it reveals a world in microcosm, telling the personal stories of individual inhabitants, while setting the drama of their lives within the context of England's changing political and social climate.
She wanted to write a novel that was a panorama, to give us a way into all these different people. We don't just follow one heroine or one hero. We enter into the consciousness of all these different individuals at different moments, almost like a camera pulling in and pulling back.
You will not like us, Middlemarch.
There are characters which are continually creating collisions and nodes for themselves in drama,
which nobody is prepared to act with them.
Let's not always see the world from the point of view of the beautiful young woman. Let's think what it looks like from the disappointed old scholar marrying this lush young girl but actually can't fulfill anything in that marriage at all. The man who fails when he thought he would succeed. The man working in the field who's told, the railways are coming, it's going to transform your life and make it brilliant. And he says, you told me that 20 years ago with the canals. I'm still stuck here as a field labourer. Nothing in my life has changed. So that sense of multiple viewpoints, all living in this same small area, just urging us just for a moment to see from someone else's point of view.
I love the way the lives are interwoven while they're separate, because that is how true life is. We all have our own story, we all have our own backstory, but we move in and out of other people's lives as well.
I think George Eliot was a very modern woman, and I believe that if she was alive now, she'd fit in very well with what we do, working in the community and the way we live. And I think she was very, very, very modern in her day, before her time.
I'm very feisty.
Yeah.
And even women are feisty.
Speak for yourself.
The novel was widely acclaimed, and her reputation was at its height. More than any writer who came before, she showed readers what was going on inside the minds and hearts of her characters.
If we had a keen vision and feeling of all ordinary human life, it would be like hearing the grass grow and the squirrel's heart beat. And we should die of that roar which lies on the other side of silence. As it is, the quickest of us walk about, well wadded with stupidity.
Adoring fans wrote Eliot letters, insisting that she understood them as they had never been understood before. And among young women, Eliot struck a particular note. She offered solace in her fiction, and in her accomplishments, she offered inspiration.
What for years you have been to me, how you have comforted my sorrows,
peopled my loneliness,
added to my happiness,
and bettered in every way my whole nature.
I feel impelled to speak now.
When I could be heard.
When I could be heard.
When I could be heard. When I could be heard.
From a very young age, she was told that she was very ugly and she'd never marry. But instead of taking that to heart and becoming a recluse, she's decided, right, I'm just going to go out and I'm going to become educated and I'm going to learn and I'm going to write and do what I want to do, and to hell with all these men that are telling me I'm not good enough.
About this time, I read a novel which seemed to me to translate my spiritual exile into words. Maggie Tulliver, like myself, was torn between others and herself. She too was too headstrong to be able to observe the conventions of her respectable surroundings. I felt my heart blaze with sympathy for her. I wept over her sorry fate for hours. I resembled her, and henceforward I saw my isolation not as proof of infamy, but as a sign of my uniqueness. Through the heroine, I identified myself with the author. One day, other adolescents would bathe with their tears a novel in which I would tell my own sad story.
The middle-aged who have lived through their strongest emotions, but are yet in the time when memory is still half passionate and not merely contemplative, should surely be a sort of natural priesthood, whom life has disciplined and consecrated to be the refuge and rescue of early stumblers and victims of self-despair.
This is Cherryman's, where George Eliot used to come to stay. It's now our family home.
enjoy our roomy house and pretty lawns greatly. Imagine me seated near a window, opening under a veranda, with flower beds and lawn and pretty hills in sight, my feet on a warm water bottle and my writing on my knees. And at 4, when the tea comes in, I begin to read aloud. About 6 or 6:30 we walk on to the commons. At 8, we are usually in the house again and fill our evening with physics, chemistry, or other wisdom, if our heads are at par.
When we are young, we think our troubles are mighty business, that the world is spread out expressly as a stage for the particular drama of our lives, and that we have a right to rant and foam at the mouth. If we understand that these things are important only to our own consciousness, which is but as a globule of dew on a rose leaf, that at midday there will be no trace of, this is no high-flown sentimentality, but a simple reflection which I find useful to me every day. It's all about time, the shortness of time that we have. The globule of dew on the rose leaf, it's there and it's instantly gone. We have this insignificant lifespan compared to universal time. I feel life's just bizarre. But here, for some unknown reason, we have all this stuff around us and then we disappear.
This is George Lewis's last diary. It's very moving, really, because in it you get his last mark. Wednesday the 20th. I woke very quiet. Paget came before breakfast. The storm has passed, I think. Got up to lunch. But that, alas, was the last entry in the diary. He didn't recover. He died a few days later.
I think she relied on him an awful lot. She's lost the love of her life. That part of her has been taken away. She's got a vacuum. She's desolate. I bless you for your goodness to me, but I am a bruised creature and shrink even from the tenderest touch. As soon as I feel able to see anybody, I will.
It was really very, very rough. 3 months she spent on her own in a room. Hardly saw anybody, and then she came out of it. She couldn't do that, and of course, almost immediately married John Cross, who was 20 years younger, but that's another story.
I think John Cross, it's interesting that he's here. He had such a close association with both George Eliot and George Henry Lewis. He was very much a family friend, and he was also their kind of business person. And they both referred to him as a nephew, actually. So he would have been a frequent visitor to that house, and so he adds some context, although, you know, he became a husband only very late in their lives. We do have to explain why John Cross is here. A lot of people don't even know very much about her personal life, so they're sometimes quite surprised that she got married at the end of her life.
My dear,
tell Johnny Cross I should have done exactly what he has done if you would have let me and I had been a man. You see, I know all love is so different that I do not see it unnatural to love in new ways, not to be unfaithful to any memory. If I knew Mr. Lewis, he'd be glad, as I am, that you have a friend.
Elliot and Cross were off on their honeymoon. Her brother, Isaac, notified of her wedding, wrote for the first time in 20 years to offer his congratulations. In his eyes, she was at last a respectable woman. Upon their return to London, the Crosses moved into Cheyne Walk, but their residence together was to be very short-lived.
I listened to her breathing, hoping it was curing sleep, but it was death coming on. George Eliot died of kidney failure, aged 61, on the 22nd of December, 1880. She was buried in Highgate Cemetery, close to George Henry Lewis, on the 29th of December. The corners of their graves almost touching. A large crowd of mourners watched, including her brother Isaac. Like Tom and Maggie Tulliver, it had taken death to bring brother and sister close again. The very consciousness of her own limbs was a delight to her. She turned up her sleeves and kissed her arms with the passionate love of life.